So, according to 4 officials inside FEMA, that federal response may not have been as fast as it might have been. They say that a new rule that any expenditure over $100,000 needed sign-off from Secretary Gnome slowed the federal response. These sources tell us that FEMA's deployment of urban search and rescue teams, which are typically deployed in anticipation they might be needed, instead was delayed until Monday, 3 days after the flood. Now, a source also tells us that a request Texas made for FEMA aerial imagery to aid in the search was also delayed, waiting for Secretary Gnome's approval. Now, additionally, multiple FEMA officials say that they were taken aback by the agency's relatively limited response in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. CNN has reached out to FEMA for comment. So far, no reply from the agency. However, a DHS spokeswoman more generally told CNN that FEMA is, in her words, quote, shifting from bloated DC-centric dead weight to a lean deployable disaster force that empowers state actors to provide relief for their citizens.
So that's breaking bombshell news courtesy of CNN by way of a leak from 4 FEMA insiders indicating that the federal response to the Texas flooding by the Trump administration was delayed and utterly disastrous, hamstrung by bureaucratic red tape, undermining the righteous self-indignation coming from Trump and MAGA that they handled everything in Texas perfectly, even as floods kill more than 100 people. This is a brutal bombshell report. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. Now, in response to this, Kristi Gnome went on Fox News and did the usual rigmarole, right? When the Trump administration gets bad news or criticism of any kind, they just simply shout, fake news, fake news.
At that point, CNN is basically got a report accusing you of slowing the process. Yeah. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, there you go. Fake news. CNN, again, is absolutely trash what they are doing by saying that, because our Coast Guard, our Border Patrol, BORTAC teams were there immediately. Every single thing I was on, they asked for, we were there. The governor and the emergency management director, Gnome KED, are fantastic. And nobody there has said anything about that they didn't get everything that they wanted immediately or that they needed. And I'm proud of the work that we've done to support that. But, you know, we've got flooding going on in New Mexico as well, right. North Carolina. So I've been visiting with their leadership team. And
so very quick to change the subject. Now, I will also point out Kristi Gnome and Fox News and Donald Trump said all sorts of things about the Biden administration's disaster relief response. And Republican governors said the same thing that Kristi Gnome is claiming that everyone is saying to her. Of course, Texas is a Republican state. Greg Abbott is a Republican governor, so of course he would not publicly criticize an administration of his own party. Whereas under the Biden administration, both Democratic and Republican governors were praising the Biden administration's response. And yet that didn't stop Trump and Gnome and others from lying and casting aspersions about the Biden administration. So again, this isn't really persuasive. And she just says fake news, everything is good, let's move on, right? Well, let's look at the report itself. FEMA's response to Texas flood slowed by Gnome's cost controls. As monstrous floodwaters, surged across central Texas late last week, officials at the Federal Emergency Management Agency leapt into action, preparing to deploy critical search and rescue teams and life-saving resources like they have in countless past disasters. But almost instantly, FEMA ran into bureaucratic obstacles, 4 officials inside the agency told CNN. As CNN has previously reported, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Gnome, whose department oversees FEMA, recently enacted a sweeping rule aimed at cutting spending. Every contract and grant over $100,000 now requires her personal sign-off before any funds can be released. Now, before we go on, I want to remind you that this is the same Kristi Gnome who plays what I think Twitter calls her fascist Barbie, right? Because she constantly engages in cosplay and live-action role-play LARPing, right, where she goes to this city or that state or whatever and has a cowboy hat on or SWAT gear or whatever. She also spent, I can't remember how many millions of dollars, many millions of dollars in a weird PR propaganda campaign. These dollars provided, by the way, by taxpayers, American citizens, to basically give Donald Trump a pat on the back regarding the border. Okay, so this is a woman who is profligate, who is fiscally irresponsible, but when it comes to federal disaster relief, now she wants to pinch pennies. Now she wants to, tidy up the budget, right? Except when it comes for her wardrobe and her PR stunts, then, of course, she gets a blank check. So again, no credibility on this issue whatsoever, and she should, along with Donald Trump, be ruthlessly mocked for the rest of their lives about this bullshit. For FEMA, where disaster response costs routinely soar into the billions as the agency contracts with on-the-ground crews, officials say that the threshold is essentially pennies, requiring sign-off for relatively small expenditures. In essence, they say the order has stripped the agency of much of its autonomy at the very moment its help is needed most. Quote, "We were operating under a clear set of guidance. Lean forward, be prepared, anticipate what the state needs, and be ready to deliver it," a longtime FEMA official told CNN. Quote, "That is not as clear of an intent for us at the moment." For example, as Central Texas towns were submerged in rising waters, FEMA officials realized they couldn't pre-position urban search and rescue crews from a network of teams stationed regionally across the country. I want to go back to that one more time. This is important. They couldn't pre-position urban search and rescue, which I would imagine is vitally important if you predict that there might be some sort of natural disaster on the way. You want these resources pre-deployed as quickly as possible, because that could be the difference between life and death for people, right? In the past, FEMA would have swiftly staged those teams, which are specifically trained for situations including catastrophic floods, closer to a disaster zone in anticipation of urgent requests, multiple agency sources told CNN. But even as Texas rescue crews raced to save lives, FEMA officials realized they needed Gnome's approval before sending those additional assets. Gnome didn't authorize FEMA's deployment of urban search and rescue teams until Monday, more than 72 hours after the flooding began. Multiple sources told CNN. That is a hell of a delay. That is a hell of a disturbing, inexplicable, indefensible delay to pre-position resources, vital resources, as has been done in the past, to save lives. Wow. Homeland Security officials have defended the federal response in Texas and Donald Trump's plan to dismantle FEMA and shift more responsibility for disaster response to states. Tricia McLaughlin, who, by the way, is appalling. John Favreau, Pod Save America, constantly goes back and forth with Tricia McLaughlin. A DHS spokeswoman told CNN that Gnome did not need to authorize additional FEMA resources initially because the department used other DHS search and rescue assets. She added that over time, as a need for FEMA resources arose, those requests received Gnome's approval. Quote, "FEMA is shifting from bloated DC-centric deadweight to a lean deployable disaster force that empowers state actors to provide relief for citizens. The old processes are being replaced because they failed Americans in real emergencies for decades." What nonsense. So you're talking about the one agency that is most experienced and specifically designed for this sort of disaster response, and you delay them, allegedly in favor of others? What others? What other disaster relief and pre-disaster resources did you deploy, and what is their track record for situations like this compared to FEMA? And for that matter, why wouldn't you do it as well? Why wouldn't, given FEMA's mandate, given the entire purpose of FEMA, why wouldn't you have them carry the ball and pre-position other less experienced, federal assets behind them? None of this makes any sense. Other Homeland Security components have assisted, including the U.S. Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection. One Texas state official told CNN that the Texas Emergency Management Division has been interacting with FEMA, quote, "in the way we always do for disasters like this." The official added that Texas has, quote, "quite a bit of capabilities related to disaster management on its own." But the additional red tape required at FEMA added another hurdle to getting critical federal resources deployed when hours counted. So again, this doesn't, their excuses, well, we were in contact with FEMA while other things were deployed. It doesn't matter. The reporting here indicates that this bureaucratic red tape for FEMA was a major issue. Texas did not request aerial imagery from FEMA to aid search and rescue operations, a source told CNN, but Texas did request aerial imagery from FEMA to aid search and rescue operations, a source told CNN, but that was delayed as it awaited Gnome's approval for the necessary contract. So even then, even if you're not talking about search and rescue teams, even just aerial imagery and the capabilities of the federal government are, you're talking about a vastly superior budget, vastly greater and more diverse experience. Federal help is always important, even for the most efficiently run state in disasters like these. And here again, a concrete example of where Gnome's penny pinching when it comes to federal disaster relief was an unnecessary impediment at a time when lives were in serious danger. Again, more than 100 people have died as a consequence of these floods. But Gnome doesn't give a damn about pennies when it comes to her PR campaign to pat Donald Trump on the back, going on tour with DHS at various points. Oh, I'm here as part of a SWAT raid. Oh, I've got my shit kickers and cowboy hat on, riding horses alongside the southern border. I mean, when it comes to that, oh, blank check, as much money as I need. But this stuff, I mean, it's the disparate values and standards are shocking. FEMA staff have also been answering phones at the disaster call center, where, according to one agency official, callers have faced longer wait times as the agency awaited Gnome's approval for a contract to bring in additional support staff. The chaos has exposed deeper uncertainty within FEMA about its ability to respond, its mission, and its authority under the Trump administration, just as hurricane and wildfire seasons have gone underway. Officials within FEMA warned that if the disaster had spanned a larger area and multiple states, the confusion and delays could have been even more severe. For months, FEMA officials have been warning that the agency is unprepared amid a mass exodus of experienced emergency managers and the looming threat of the agency being dismantled, which is what the Trump administration has repeatedly threatened. CNN has reached out for comment. So, unbelievable. See, after the skies over Central Texas, the rest of this article, I think, is just like a recap of what's gone on. At least one state requested a guarantee that FEMA would cover the steep costs and potential damage to equipment, a promise the federal agency couldn't make on the spot, although the issue was quickly resolved. Two sources with the knowledge of the matter told CNN. All of this raises questions over the vision of emergency management Trump has laid out several times with his administration. Again, Texas has turned to the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, the EMAC, a mutual aid agreement between states. So Texas is having to turn to other states instead of the federal government. This is shocking stuff. It really is. And I will also point out, even as Gnome's only defense is fake news, this comes on the back of Trump and Gnome repeatedly threatening to prosecute CNN in recent weeks. So there we have it, folks. A breaking bombshell report indicating that Kristi Gnome's mismanagement of FEMA was a disastrous impediment to a natural disaster that was already difficult to manage that claimed the lives of more than 100 people. And her only response to it is fake news, move on. Pretty gross. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.